A customer invoice in CenterPoint is used to record the sale of goods or services. A sales invoice will increase or decrease an accounts receivable account and will typically be offset by a revenue account. To record a sales invoice in CenterPoint, there are two options. If I go to Processes and Sales, in customer invoices here, you'll see that there is an option for customer invoices or for customer invoices quick entry. The quick entry screen condenses the sales invoice entry screen to a single tab by pushing some of the invoice details to the background. Either screen can be used to record invoices. Today's video will talk about the first one, customer invoices. There is a separate video for customer invoices quick entry. So we're going to go ahead and click on customer invoices. The first field that you come to on the customer invoice screen is the company field. Now, if you only have one company in your database, such as I have, then that company field is going to be filled in automatically. If you have more than one company, you can select one company and actually set it as the default company. To select a company, you can either hit the F4 key on the keyboard, and that'll bring up a lookup of all of the companies available. And you can use your up and down arrow keys to move you through the list, find the one you want, and hit enter to select it. The other option is to go ahead and click on the lookup icon at the end of this field. So you notice there's a number of different fields that have that lookup icon on them. Any of those lookup fields, you can use either of those methods. You can use the F4 key to look up the item, or you could click on the magnifying glass icon at the end. From there, then, it's going to take me to the customer field. And this is where I'm going to choose the customer that this particular invoice is for. Now, there's a couple different things that are going to happen when this customer is selected. There's a number of different defaults that are set on the customer record that are going to populate some of the other fields as soon as this customer record is selected. Those are some of the details that are kind of pushed to the background in the quick entry screen that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and choose my customer, Red Wing Bicycle Club, by typing in a few characters of the name. I could have also hit my F4 key to bring up the lookup, or I could have clicked on the icon at the end of the field. So I'm going to hit Tab to go ahead and do the lookup. Then once I type a few characters into the field, hitting the Tab key will take and find the item. From there, it positioned my cursor on this next field here. Now, there are a number of different places where we can actually enter in some additional notes for this particular customer. Okay, one of those places is on the customer record itself. So when you're setting up a customer, there's a place on the customer record to put in additional notes. But this button here allows me to see any additional notes that have already been entered in for this customer. And if I need to add other additional notes, I can go ahead and add those additional notes by going ahead and putting in a timestamp and then entering in those additional notes. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now those additional notes will stay with that customer record. So the next time you use this customer in an invoice and you want to see those notes, all you have to do is click on the button there. From there, then, it's going to take me to the invoice number. The invoice number is a sequence that is set up in CenterPoint, and you can, as soon as you type in the first number, it'll increment from that point forward. You can have multiple invoice sequences. If you want to set up additional sequences, you can either right-click on the field here and go to New to create a new sequence, or you can create a new sequence by going to Set Up, General, and then Numbering Sequences. So either place would allow you to set up additional sequences. And then to select from different sequences, you would click on the icon at the end of the field or hit the F4 key on that field, and then you can select from the different sequences available. As you see, I only have the one. From there, then it's going to go ahead and go to the date field, and it's going to default the date to either today's date or to the last month, the end of the last month in which you had entered in a customer invoice. So last time I entered in a customer invoice was 12/31/2019. I'm going to change that date to today's date, which happens to be 4/16/2020. Okay, from there it goes to a customer PO number, where if I have a customer PO number, I can enter it in. And then it's going to bring up some of the fields that it defaulted from my customer setup record. So over here are a whole bunch of fields that it defaults. And if you noticed from the customer PO number, when I hit tab, it moved down here and it skipped all those fields, because typically I am defaulting those from the customer record, and normally I don't have to change them. So I've taken them out of my tab order. The way to take them out of the tab order is one of the options down at the bottom. So you see here where we can set tab stops, and I have taken and removed a number of those items, such as the shipping method. You'll see that there's no check mark in there. So if I do want it to stop at that field in the tab order, all I have to do is go ahead and put the check mark back in there. But all of these items, the salesperson, the shipping method, the terms, and the sales tax are things that that are defaulted from the customer record, as well as the billing address, the shipping address. If there was a memo to field entered up on the customer record, or if there was a memo field entered on the customer record, I would see it in the memo to field. And then also the accounts receivable account. Okay, so those are all things that are defaulted from that customer setup. The due date and the discount date are calculated from the term. The payment term that was defaulted to that customer said that this invoice is going to be due within 30 days from this invoice date. So it calculated the due date 30 days from this invoice date. And it also then calculated a discount date of 10 days from the invoice date. So they will get a 2% discount if they pay within 10 days. Okay, so that was what my term was set up to be. Any of these fields can be overwritten. So if I want to choose a different shipping method, I can just choose a different shipping method. If I want to assign different terms, I can select different terms. If I need to select a different sales tax, I can do that. Okay, I also can set up different addresses for my customer on the customer record. So for this particular invoice, they have the billing address might remain the same, but they have a different shipping address. And one thing I want to show you is that a couple of these fields will change depending on the shipping address. Two of those fields are sales tax and shipping method. If I go ahead and I choose a different shipping address, right now my sales tax is set to Red Wing, but if I change it to a different shipping address, it might change my sales tax to something else, and it also changed my shipping method. Okay, so those things are driven by the shipping address. Memo 1 and Memo 2 do print on the sales invoice. So if you wanted to put some sort of a memo in there, you could. Typically, Memo 2 is coming from the setup of the customer record. And I didn't have any memo set up on mine, so it didn't fill that in there. Now, the accounts receivable account could actually be coming from one of two places. Notice down here when I hit the accounts button that there are a whole bunch of default accounts already set up for my database. This is my default accounts receivable account, and you see that that is the same as the accounts receivable account over here. Okay, so that's my default accounts receivable account. If I'm depositing or if I'm taking money into the bank on this invoice, so if this customer is paying me at the time that I am entering in this invoice, I could apply cash to it, and that cash would go into this bank account. This is my customer deposits account. This is the freight income account that I want any freight charges to go to. My miscellaneous charges would go to product sales, and these are my accounts that I want for trade or term discounts. Okay, also I could assign accounts for a default, or I could assign a default shipping method, a default payment type, which I'm probably going to change that to check, and then also a default sales tax. So those are things that I can set as defaults. Those defaults, though, are set as a preference. And you can find that preference underneath File and Preferences, and underneath Customer Invoices and Defaults. And on the Database tab here is where all of those initial preferences are changed. So I'm going to change this one right here, but that's where all those initial preferences are changed and where those default accounts are coming from. Okay, the accounts receivable account that's set up there on the preference, though, is one of the fields that can be overridden by the customer record. If I was to right click on the customer and go to edit here, there is a place on the accounting tab where you can select a different accounts receivable account. There's no need to set an account in here if it's the same as the default one that we set in preferences. But if you want this customer to go to a different accounts receivable account, you could select the accounts receivable account in the box here, and then it would use that account. So whatever's set up on the customer record would override the preference setting. Okay, I'm going to go back here and rechange my address, because when I went and edited that customer, it changed back my default shipping address there. So I'm going to rechange it. Okay, at the bottom or near the bottom of the screen here are some buttons for printing and emailing the invoice, and we'll talk about that when we get to the end of the invoice, so I'll come back to those fields there. You'll notice that it does put in the customer balance here. Any credit limit and any remaining credit for the customer are going to be listed down here. Those fields are also repeated at the top of the next tab. So when I go to the invoice tab, those fields are actually repeated over here. Okay. Before I go ahead and come to this tab, though, I'm going to go back to the Select tab and talk about a couple of these other options. Over here at the bottom of the screen is an options button, and the first option is to review transactions. That option would bring up the last 10 transactions entered in on this screen. So if I'm not sure whether or not I already entered in this invoice, I could go ahead and take and review the transactions and see whether or not I have entered in this invoice already. So if I wanted to look at this one to make sure that this wasn't the invoice that I'm currently trying to enter in, I could double click on it and look at the details of that invoice. I could even edit it if I needed to. I'm going to go ahead and close that. If I click on options again, one of the options is to be able to enter in any custom fields that I might have set up. So as I click on mine, you see here that I have a custom field set up called sales type, where I could go in here and go ahead and say that this is a commercial sale. Okay, so if I'm recording different sales types, I'm going to go ahead and type it in the field there. Now that's just a field that I entered because Red Wing didn't set up a field for me to record that information, and it's information that's important to our company. So we went ahead and created a custom field for it. There's also a place here to put in any comments on this particular transaction. So where do we set up custom fields? The place to set up custom fields is underneath Setup File and Preferences. And if I go to General, there is an option for custom transaction fields. And I can set up to 8 different custom transaction fields by giving them a label, telling us what kind of information is going to be recorded there. And then if it is a numeric piece of information, the last piece, of course, would be telling us if there's any decimal places. Okay, this would happen to be a text piece of information. And then if you set up those fields, they will be available by going to options and custom fields on every transaction they're available. I'm going to click on options again, and we already talked about tab stops. Okay, so the rest of this information I'm going to talk about when we go over here to the invoice tab. The invoice tab, remember I said that the customer balance, credit limit, and remaining credit would be repeated at the top of this tab, and it is. It's also repeating who the customer is that we're working on, the date of the invoice, and the invoice number. But this is where I'm going to enter in the detail of the different items that are being sold on this particular invoice. So I can either go ahead and look up those items by clicking on the lookup here, or if I know the abbreviation or a few characters of the name of the item, I could go ahead and type those in the field here and then hit tab, and it will go ahead and look those up. So I typed in Econo, and so it found two items that match that, economy bicycle package and the economy ski package. I'm going to select the economy bike package just by hitting an enter on my keyboard. Okay, then it's going to ask me for how many of them that this particular customer purchased. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the quantity, and it jumps to the description field here. Now the description field is coming from the item setup as well as the additional description. Both of these items will print on the invoice itself. You can override either one of them. So if you wanted to, give it a different name, you could go ahead and give it a different name by just typing in a different name there. Or if you wanted to add something to the additional description, you could add something to the additional description. So like perhaps we have added to this a water bottle cage. We can go ahead and put in water bottle cage here. Okay, and then go ahead and click save. Okay, it will also, if you set up prices on the item that you're selling, it will also go ahead and default in the prices here. But if you have negotiated a different price with that customer, then you can go ahead and enter in the price here. So let's say that we said that we'd throw in that water bottle cage if they paid $103 per bike package. So we went ahead and changed that, and it goes ahead and calculates the amount. Now, if there's other pieces of information that I want to record about this particular item, I do have the opportunity to record them. I would need to, though, add them as columns to this grid. So one of those items that I would like to add is the profit center. Now to add, you notice here if I scroll all the way to the right, I don't have a column for the profit center. Okay, if I want to add that column, all I need to do is to go ahead and right click on anywhere on the grid or in the blank area there and go to add remove columns. And you'll see here that there is a whole series of other pieces of information that might be available for this particular sales item. So what I'm going to add is I'm going to just go ahead and add the column for profit center. So I'm going to go ahead and select profit center and click OK, and now I'm going to have a column for profit center. Now, if I wanted that profit center to be somewhere else on this transaction screen, maybe I want to make sure that I don't skip it, so I want to move it closer to the sales price, I can go ahead and do that one of two ways. Either I can hold down my left mouse button on the column heading and go ahead and drag it to where I want it to be, or if I right click and go to add remove columns again, you can see if you highlight a column, you can use the up and down arrow keys to change its position. Okay, so now I have a place to record the profit center. So I'm going to say that this goes to my biking profit center. And then I can go ahead and drop down to the entering in the next item. So the next item was they went ahead and ordered some standard bike packages, and they ordered 5 of those. And we went ahead and threw in the water bottle cage for that. So I'm going to go once again, go ahead and change my description. And this time we're going to leave the price as it is and go ahead and still put that to biking equipment. And I can continue to add as many items as I need to. And then when when I'm done adding items down at the bottom, I get the option of if I did set up my salespeople to calculate commissions on the sales, those commissions would have been calculated here. I can also manually enter in commission. So I could go ahead and say that we're giving him a commission of $25. And we're going to go ahead and override what was already previously calculated. Any freight charges that you might have, you can enter in here. And then that's going to go to whatever account was set up here in preferences for freight. So that's going to go to my freight income account. And if I wanted to attach any details like a profit center to that income, I can go ahead and click on freight here and once again go ahead and add the profit center for the freight income. The same thing with any miscellaneous charges. If I had miscellaneous charges, if I click on the accounts button, I can see that miscellaneous charges are going to an account called product sales. And if I had put any miscellaneous charges here and I wanted to assign a profit center detail or location or project or associated account or a notation to it, I could add any of those details to that miscellaneous charge. I don't have any miscellaneous charges for this item, so we're going to leave that blank. Any sales taxes that were calculated on the sale are going to show here on the sales tax box. If I wanted to see the breakdown of those sales taxes, I could click on sales tax and it would show me then the breakdown of it. And if I needed to, for whatever reason, to override that, I can override it here. Any trade discounts that were calculated are going to show up in the discounts box over here. So it is calculating a trade discount on some of the sales of these items. So I did set up a trade discount for that. So it went ahead and it calculated that there. I can see the journal entry being created by each one of these pieces of the transactions by clicking on the plus sign next to each one of those lines there. So you can see that even though I sold these for $103 a sales price, it did calculate a discount for them. Okay, so it did calculate the trade discount then on the sales of those items. So that's why I wanted to show you that so you could see the trade discount was being represented there. Okay, if the customer happens to give me a check at the time of this invoice and I want to apply the payment to this invoice, this is where I can do it. And or if I had any deposits that the customer had already paid, I could apply those deposits here by clicking on the amount received button. If I had any deposits, they would be listed up at the top and I could either apply a specific amount or apply the entire deposit to this particular invoice. It's also going to show for any terms that I have what discounts might be available to the customer. So this is the discount that's going to be available to the customer if they pay within 10 days. I could override that calculation of the discount. If I don't want to offer a discount on this, I can go ahead and override that. So you have the option of doing that. And then if I actually received a check from the customer, I can go ahead and choose the bank account that's going to go into, the payment type, the customer check number, and then whatever amount they paid me. Okay, so let's say they gave me a check for $500. I could be applying that $500 to this invoice. So that's going to leave a remaining net due of $1,416.52. All right, one thing I do want to show you here is underneath options, there is an option for applied customer deposits. Mine is set up to automatically apply customer deposits. So if I happen to have had a customer deposit on this customer, it would have automatically applied it. I do have the option of overriding that though by clicking on the amount received button, and then it would allow me to unapply it to this particular invoice. Or if by default you want to manually handle applying customer deposits to invoices, you could leave this bottom section selected. Now, before I hit save, I'm going to pop back over here to the select tab, and I just wanted to talk about these two buttons here. These being checkmarked in green means that it's set up as default that every time I enter in a invoice for this customer, we're going to print that invoice, but we're also going to email it out. Okay, so that's why this one is checked in green here. Okay, both of those settings are settings that are set up on the customer. If I right click on Red Wing Bike Club and go into Edit Red Wing Bike Club, there is a email print tab here. And I have set it up to email invoices to Lance at Red Wing Bike Club. Okay, so all my invoices are going to go there as well as my statements. But I also still want to print it. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as yes so that it will print the invoice for me. Okay, so that's where those settings are coming from. You can override the setting. You could say don't print, or you could choose a different printer or a different form for that. The form default for customer invoices is a preference setting. So under File and Preferences and under Customer Invoices, there is a place here for, I guess I have to go down to printing. There is a place here for customer invoices for me to go ahead and set up what printer I want those to go to and what form I want to use and the number of copies that we're going to print. Okay, so those are all options that are set up in preferences, and I can override those options by going ahead and changing the settings here on this button. Okay, the emailing of the invoice also has some preference settings. So you notice that we've already defaulted in a default subject line, a default message, and selected the form that is going to be attached to the email. Those are all settings that you also can set in preferences, and those are set underneath File and Preferences, and then under Email Setup. Under Email Setup and Email Setup here on the Database tab, you're going to give us information about your email service so that those emails can come out. So you might need to talk to your internet service provider as to what those settings should be for your emails, and then you'll go ahead and give it a test just to make sure that the settings are correct. Okay, then under customer invoices, you can set up what you want to be the default subject line and the default message to these emails that are going to go out, and then tell us what form we're going to use for those emails. So it needs to be some sort of a plain paper type of an invoice, and we've got one called the system default one. Okay, you can make changes to the system default invoice. Okay, so those settings are there and we can override both of those settings. This third icon here is the scan icon. And if I have set up my scanner, which I do underneath File and Scanners here, there's a place there for me to set up my scanners. I could scan in a document and attach it to this transaction so that the next time I brought up this transaction, I would also be able to view that document. So I could scan it in by clicking that button if I have properly gone ahead and set up my scanner. Or if the document that I want to attach to this particular email or this particular transaction is a document that I received maybe via email or something and have saved it on my hard drive, I can attach it to this transaction by clicking this button and then clicking attach, and then I could browse out anywhere on my hard drive and find the document that I want to attach to this and click attach. Right, so I'm ready to go ahead and save this transaction. And at this time, it'll go ahead and print it and it'll go ahead and email it. And that is customer invoices.